Welcome to the Northern Business Podcast. Each week we talk to people active in business and the economy about the big issues that are driving the growth and affecting business in the north of England. We're sponsored by Virtue Motors, one of the UK's largest motor retailers. Check out its website at virtuemotors.com. I'm Graham Robb. I own Recognition PR. We help scores of businesses promote their products and services, and we sometimes feature them on this podcast. Now, make sure you don't miss an episode by subscribing on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. Now, we're live on LinkedIn every Wednesday night on my LinkedIn channel at 5 o'clock. If you're watching live, hello. If you're listening or watching the recording, it's good to have you on this first Wednesday after Easter. Now, today's episode is a special edition. We're dedicating it to one issue, Labour's New Deal for Working People. It's a paper that's very important because Labour has said that it could be implemented within the first 100 days of a Labour government being elected. Now, for full disclosure, I'm a long-standing Conservative Party member, but I don't want that to inform us. I want to tackle this from the point of view on how these proposals could impact businesses. So I've asked an HR expert into the studio, and with me I've got Nicky Jolley, who's Managing Director at HR2day. Now, before we start talking to Nicky, let's put these proposals into a sort of political context. On a recent edition of Laura Kuenssberg's flagship BBC political discussion programme, the Shadow Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, was asked to confirm if these proposals would be enacted.
While we're talking about Angela Rayner, her big plan, a big part of Labour's plan, is to really extend workers' rights. In fact, from day one, essentially give more or less the same rights to everybody, whether they're freelancers or whether they're somebody who's working part-time. Can you guarantee that that full package will be in the Labour manifesto?
Yes, we have committed to the extension of workers' rights, including banning zero-hour contracts, getting rid of fire and rehire, and having a real minimum wage. Obviously, the Low Pay Commission will set that. But this is a big extension of the rights of working people, because if an economy is not working for working people, it's not working at all. And at the moment, too many people are stuck in insecure, precarious work. We went into the pandemic with 11 million people having less than £100 worth of savings. That reflects not just low pay, but also terribly insecure work for too many people. We do want to change that, but of course we'll work with businesses to make sure that our plans work for them as well, including, for example, probation periods in employment contracts. So, we do want to make changes, but all of our plans are pro-business and pro-worker, because the two things are the two sides of the same coin.
But you've given a clear commitment on the record that you will have the full package in your manifesto, and that's interesting to hear.
Well, that was an introduction to this white paper with Rachel Reeves confirming that it's actually a green paper, that it would be part of Labour's proposals for government. Now, joining me in the studio is Nicky Jolley, who's from HR2day. Now, tell us a little bit about your firm and your background before we look at these proposals, Nicky.
Thank you for having me. We've been running HR2day for 14 years. It's our 14th year. But prior to that, I worked in oil and gas manufacturing for over 10 years of my career, where I worked with union negotiations, collective bargaining and things like that. And we obviously have brought that knowledge and experience into our business, where we're outsourced HR, giving advice to lots of different industries and sectors across the UK.
OK, so you've got a lot of frontline experience, some with the big manufacturing sectors, but HR2day tends to handle some of the smaller businesses as well, doesn't it?
Small to medium,
right,
generally,
excellent.
Yes.
OK, so that's where you're coming from. We've got this green paper from Angela Rayner, was the person that prepared this and led for Labour on this. Now, there's lots of items in it. It's quite a long document. So I've picked 14 items, and I've tried to confine picking the items that affect businesses, not the rights that the sort of benefits rights that workers would get from it. There's a lot more in it than just the methods for businesses. First one, something I definitely agree with, and that's Labour will ban unpaid internships. Now, that seems to be something that is good practice, really.
Absolutely. I mean, really, you don't want to be bringing people in completely free, slave labour. You know, we would always encourage that you support and pay those people for doing that. A little day experience there, another is slightly different. An internship, why would you not be paying for the efforts that they're putting into your business? And we would encourage that.
Now, the next one, which has been more contentious and has certainly been talked about among business people I've talked to, and that is Labour will give all workers day one rights on the job. Now, what's the intention of that?
What they're looking at there is this 2-year unfair dismissal claim. So at the moment, there's 2 years on, you can't claim unfair dismissal. The way we advise our clients is if you treat your employees well, you act reasonably, and you deal with any issues that come up, you shouldn't really focus on 2 years unfair dismissal. What they're proposing is there won't be a 2-year protection. But there's many other ways that employers can end up in a tribunal in the 2 years that are still effective. So, we always say to our clients, ignore the 2 years and focus on managing your people properly and actually making sure that things are addressed. So what they're saying is they're enforcing that to happen rather than it not happening and people just taking the risk and getting rid of people.
But if somebody was taken on and they were in the first 2 years and you're trying to manage them and it doesn't work, you as an employer can dismiss them within that 2 years and there can be no comeback on those points. Now, there are other points like ethnicity, quite rightly, or discrimination, that kind of issue where you don't have 2 years anyway.
Yes, exactly. There's breach of contract, there's discrimination, there's all the protected characteristics. So those are from day one. Some of them are actually before you even start working for a company. So when we say recruitment is really important, that you ensure that you treat people fairly and equally, people can actually take a claim from a recruitment process.
So what is the impact on this all workers day one rights? What is the actual impact?
Employers will have to behave responsibly and manage people rather than making rash decisions to dismiss people.
And what if the decision to dismiss isn't rash, but you've gone through a training programme where the employee hasn't managed to succeed?
I think we're going to touch on it, but first of all, there'll be probation periods. We don't know what that's going to look like.
Yes, Rachel Reeves said that in our clip.
Yes.
But there is no mention of probation periods in the document.
No, I mean, currently we recommend probation periods. We recommend 6 months, and we see that as an opportunity for the employee and the employer for a 6-month trial. That's an opportunity to establish, are you right for the firm and they're right? And to be perfectly honest, in probation, as long as it's not a protected characteristic or a breach of anybody's rights, you can dismiss under probation. She's implied that's going to stay. We don't know what that looks like. My fear of that is unless there's clear boundaries, people will start putting in 2-year probation clauses. 6 months, some people think is quite long. The way we look at it is it's a fair trial, 6 months. They haven't been clear what all of that is going to mean. But the reality is, whether it's 2 years, 10 years, 20 years, if you've followed a process, if you've gone through, trained, developed, supported, and the employee is still not delivering, you can dismiss somebody, but you follow a process to do that under performance.
Okay, let's look at the next one. This is more taken more headlines, and that's Labour will create a single status of worker. And the little sentence is Labour will ensure that this injustice is rectified, the injustice of some workers having rights, others not, creating a single status of worker for all but the genuinely self-employed. Now, if a small business was to employ a graphic designer and they were regularly working for that small business, is it possible that under this, that graphic designer would gain employment rights with that small business?
That is the risk that's been implied, that really you may as well be bringing them in on an employment contract so that you know exactly where you stand from beginning to end. I think what... I
say the word danger, meaning from the employer's point of view, from the worker's point of view, that may not be how they see it.
And I think there's the other side of the coin to that. You've got to think, some people are in these positions because they choose to be in these positions. They want to be freelancers. They want to nip here, there and everywhere. They don't want to be tied to a company. So I can see the protected rights as appealing, but it can create complex and difficult circumstances to who these people are going to work for. Then you get the NI issues and the tax issues and the holiday issues, and it's going to be very complex. And I think they're going to have to provide great clarity in what this means. And I think potentially the freelancing work will reduce because people won't want to take the risk.
Now let's move on to sort of a related topic. Labour will ban 0 hours contracts and give workers predictable contracts. What could be the effect of this?
The effect of this is people will get less work because, again, 0 hours contracts, we deal with them in some sectors and managed correctly, they work for both parties. There's no obligation to give work, there's no obligation to take work. So families, mums, fathers who want casual work. It works for them that, we've got a shift. Would you like to work? Yes, no. It gives people flexibility. It gives them options. By putting restrictions on, and I know 0 hours have got such a bad reputation, but honestly, there are sectors that this works perfectly for both parties. And I think they need to look at that in caution because, again, I think what people will do is stop having flexible working.
They may, I suppose, make minimum hours contracts.
Yes, that is a possibility that they'll guarantee you 1-2 hours a week and you may end up doing overtime 5, 6, 20 hours a week. It's that 12 hours that you're going to have to be managing to give them those average contractual hours.
Next is unions. Now, I'm glad you explained you dealt with unions in negotiations before. I've always run a very small business. I've not had unions. And of course, under Tony Blair's rules, all small businesses under 20 staff didn't have to deal with unions, and that was straightforward. And there's no such exemption in these proposals, but equally there's nothing that states that exemption would be removed. So the first thing it says is that unions have been subject to increasingly restrictive rules. Most recently, the Trade Union Act 2016, which included what they call arbitrary thresholds for industrial action ballots and complicated balloting and notice rules designed to make industrial action and union organisation more difficult. And they go on to say Labour will update trade union legislation so it's fit for the modern economy. And they go on to talk about how certain union legislation will be repealed and it will simplify the process of union recognition, establishing a reasonable right of entry into workplaces. Labour will also end the current complexity and remove barriers to workers being collectively represented by recognising trade unions in their workplace. Now that, as a small business to me, makes it feel possible that I would be forced to recognise a union. But what is your experience in this? Is this something the small business owner or the SME business owner needs to concern themselves with?
I think for clarity, an employee can be a member of any union.
Of course.
And if they're part of any process, they're entitled to bring their union rep. So anybody feeling strong and powerful about this opinion, they can have union support now. And that's everybody. So if you put somebody through a disciplinary procedure, they could say, I'm part of a union, and you would welcome them to that process. So I see very little of that at the moment. So I don't see this from an employee-driven
and this is about collective bargaining rather than individual.
Yes. And then, so you've got the collective bargaining. It can work very, very well. So in the oil and gas, when I worked for an oil refinery, we had our operators and our refinery staff had collective bargaining. And what it meant every year is that we had boundaries. Some companies don't, but we had fixed boundaries. And we went into a pay negotiation. And every year we agreed it. Or if we started getting to a point where we would agree a 2 or 3 year agreement because of the time it consumed and what it took to get to where we needed to get to. It's still driven by performance of the business, and it's still driven by the management of the organisation to what they can afford.
Now, those were bigger businesses, though.
They were much bigger businesses with much bigger budgets and probably higher profits. This, to a small organisation, is going to be time-consuming. I hope that if they're going to bring this in, they're going to bring us guidance and support so that we're not having to do that. We used to have to get solicitors involved to our collective agreements and get them all drafted properly and agreed by both the union lawyers and our company lawyers. It can be a very, very onerous process that, personally, I don't think at the moment smaller companies can sustain.
All right, let's move on to the next bit, which is similar, a related topic. And this is Labour will establish fair pay agreements across the economy. And this is about sectoral collective bargaining, a quote, reversing decades-long decline of collective bargaining coverage. Worker representatives and employer representatives would be brought together to negotiate fair pay agreements that establish minimum terms and conditions which would be binding on all employers and workers in that sector. Could you amplify that, practically explain what that would mean to different businesses?
We had a discussion earlier that potentially it could mean London-based companies are setting the boundaries of what the pay sector is, and us in the North East would be bound by those pay agreements. So we're losing, any of the levelling up would be coming in. We would lose the advantages of the North East currently can be more competitive in certain sectors and services. And it would mean that across the nation, certain sectors would all be on a pay grade.
Now, what I've read in different media about this, there was a very big piece in a broadsheet paper this week, was that Labour would pilot this in social care. So if you take social care, there would be employer representatives, trade union representatives that negotiate minimum terms and conditions, particularly for people who are the lowest paid, care assistants and so on, certainly need that kind of thing. But an owner-managed care home in, the northeast of England would then have to abide by all of the terms and conditions established by maybe big sector groups in care homes that were negotiating on behalf of the industry. Same with my own industry, PR, your industry, small administrative businesses. So is this a forward-looking policy? Is this a policy that, again, smaller owner-managed businesses may have to have cause to fear?
I think there is a big cause to fear. I think it could cripple small businesses. Personally, as a local North East company, we've had to address our salaries continuously for the last 4 years to compete with, the Treasury coming here. We've got Tees Valley Combined Authority. We're trying to keep up where we are now. Never mind the influx of, London rate salaries and things like that. So I think it is a big fear, personally. I think it will cripple some companies. I think the other fear is that we've seen all the strikes where unions have gone in with far unrealistic rates. They're wanting 20% down to 12%. Companies cannot afford 12% across the board. We're already paying minimum wage increases of 10% at the moment. And if you're trying to keep your staff differential up, you're already paying more than 10% to your existing staff.
I mean, it could take us back to the days where you had lots of different companies in, say, the haulage sector, but the national collective bargaining with the transport and general workers in the late 70s could have a lorry drivers dispute, and it could hit everyone, even though your firm may not be in dispute with your staff.
And grinding the country to a halt.
So that's where there is a weakness in it. On the other hand, if you are a member of a trade body, your business is a member of, in my case, the Chartered Institute of Public Relations or PRCA, or people who are a member of Make UK, things like that, that might encourage sector collaboration among employers as well.
There's some positives. I think if they need to start looking regionally initially. I think the jump is too great to get us across all of it. I think the other concern I have with pay negotiations, and we saw this in industry, you don't get anything else. So you can be working with somebody that doesn't perform, and that's a management issue. I absolutely get the union's argument to that, is it's your job to manage that person that's underperforming. But then you've got your high performers that don't get recognised, that don't get rewarded. So you end up with everybody earning the same, whether they're fantastic employees or whether they turn up and do the bare minimum.
Okay, let's go through some other points then. We'll maybe spend less time and just tick through what you think the implications are. Labour will bring in the automatic right to switch off. It will be particularly for people working from home, so that homes don't turn into 24/7 offices. On some levels, that seems pretty reasonable.
It is reasonable, and I personally don't think we need it. I mean, yes, people do work out of hours, but I see that more as, in a general context, I see that more as individuals choosing to rather than firms expecting it.
I mean, I sometimes ring my staff out of hours, but it's an exception rather than the rule.
Exactly.
And it would never happen on holidays, except in the direst of emergencies. But the right not to be contacted out of hours, or it could affect all sorts of sectors, but it's happening anyway?
I would say I don't see that as an issue at all. We never see grievances, issues being raised that I'm expected to work and they're constantly contacting me. I email a lot of people on an evening. I don't expect a response. I'm very clear about that. Respond in working hours, but I'm going to work.
It's about your work, not about the person's work. Right.
Exactly, yeah. So I will always say to my team, if I email you on a night, I don't expect a response. And if I get one, I want to know why. And I've got to be honest, I think that's fair across the board. I don't know companies that are expecting people to work out of hours.
Let's go through some others. Labour will make flexible working a day one right. Flexible working, what does it mean and how can it be a right? How does it work, do you think?
So
because it's already in a bit.
It's already in. It's in place. We haven't seen a massive flux of suddenly people doing this. To be honest, I don't really see it as a big issue. I think the concern I would have is people may apply for jobs knowing fine well they don't want to work full time, or they don't want to work the hours that they've applied for a job, and on day one they come in and ask for a change. And my concern is more about that trust and integrity of the recruitment process and somebody starting. I appreciate through your working life things can change. Your drivers in life can change.
OK, moving on to the next one. Labour will give those with caring responsibilities greater protections, strengthen the rights of workers to respond to family emergencies with paid family and carers leave. I think the key thing here is paid, not that one wants to not give people the ability to respond to family emergencies.
I mean, yes, you're right. It's in at the moment unpaid. People can take emergency leave for care. The paid... Who's paying it? I assume it's the smaller firms and the companies that are responsible. It's more the cost impact rather than people not wanting people to have leave if they need it.
But employers just need to plan for that.
Yes.
The next one is about neurodiversity. And it's a paragraph really not just about neurodiversity, but about provision of stress, mental health, the impact of new technology and new materials, and the impact of emerging health and lifestyle issues such as long COVID. It seems like a reasonable thing to say one has to plan for these things, but it's getting a very specific focus.
It is, and I think we need a lot more support from GPs and medical practitioners, occupational health. I think we need clear guidance on this, because unfortunately there are still people that use these things to their advantage rather than being genuine. And as an employer, that's very hard to prove.
Now, larger firms with more than 250 staff already have to do gender pay gap reporting. That was brought in by Theresa May. It was one of the things that she was very concerned about. Under Labour's proposal, that will be extended to ethnicity pay gaps. I suppose that's something that larger firms may be more equipped to deal with the reporting on.
I think they are more equipped to reporting. I think it's quite onerous for smaller companies to be starting to having to do all these extra reports. And again, it's just more work for the smaller companies, not focusing on what they're there to do.
Labour, by the way, this is not comprehensive. We haven't got time for comprehensive. No. People can read their proposals on their website, I suppose, as you have. Labour's committed to extending statutory maternity and paternity leave, introducing a right to bereavement leave and strengthening protections for pregnant women, making it unlawful to dismiss a woman who is pregnant for 6 months, except in specific circumstances. It doesn't tell you what those circumstances are. So if a company was unfortunate enough to need to, conduct a round of redundancies, the suggestion could be that somebody who's pregnant or recently had a baby would be exempt from that.
Pretty much that's what they're saying. They're saying for 18 months, so from the baby's birth or to when they've told the firm that they're pregnant, to when they come back, they are going to have much more protection. They've already got a lot of protection. And our advice would be, if somebody's just come back, you wouldn't put them up for redundancy. The reality is they've just confirmed that and extended that out to firms, that you must be more cautious, look for suitable alternatives. I suppose the exemptions would be as if your firm's closing, you don't have a choice.
OK. And finally, Labour will establish a single enforcement body to protect workers. Now, this feels like a new bureaucracy, a new team or army of inspectors to go into your workplace and ask questions and get involved.
I think it's going to take some transition. I think they're going to have to provide a lot more information of what that means. I potentially think it could be good. It's consistent. It's fair. It could be reasonable. I think at the moment they just haven't given enough information, and I do think that's going to take some time. To think that that could be in 100 days is a little bit scary, personally.
Well, Nicky, thanks for talking us through it. I think probably both of us would say that anyone who's in business, running a business, should probably read this. Obviously, it may not come in because Labour may not win the election. Just because lots of commentators are saying there'll be a change of government doesn't mean there will be. That's a fair point to make. But nevertheless, preparation is best, I suppose.
I think all firms should be looking at it, preparing for the future of lots of things that should be coming. And I do think, yes, it would be worth a read.
Okay.
It's interesting.
So not a debate on it today, but definitely a little bit of an explainer. Thank you very much indeed, Nicky. Now, the first week of April, that was a couple of weeks ago, always sees a lot of changes in taxes and tariffs. And last Saturday marked a new tax year, heralding various changes. we wanted to give you a little bit of a review of that. Let's briefly look at them with my colleague Joss.
Thanks, Graham. Now, every April brings massive changes in terms of legislation and tax arrangements, and this year is no different. There's all kinds of changes, which all took place last Saturday, the first day of the tax year. As ever, there's more money, there's less money, and I just thought it'd be good if we could run through some of those changes because it's going to be very important for people working in business in the north of England. So, I've got my very handy little prompt here from the Northern Business Podcast. There's more money for the public. So for some people, it's good news. For employees and members of the public, they're going to see a national insurance cut from going down from 10% down to 8%. Benefits are set to rise by 6.7%. And for those of you who are old enough and lucky enough to receive one, the state pension is set to rise, or has risen, should I say, by 8.5%. The national living wage, that is the national minimum wage in old money, has gone up by £1.02 to £11.44 an hour. Now, I remember my first job was £16,000 out of university, so it's been a big change since then. The energy price cap has fallen by just under £240 for the average household consumption. But of course, the hand that gives also takes away. So council tax is set to rise by just under 5% at 4.99%. That's an average across the whole of the UK. And TV licence, the thing that pays for the BBC radio, TV in England, but also for BBC worldwide, that's gone up to just under £170. That's a rise of just over £10. And for people on fixed tariff mobile and broadband bills, built into those contracts is often an upsurge, and that's gone up by an average of 8.8%. Again, more bills going up. Water bills going up by 6%, and car tax, that's the price that you pay to have your vehicle on the road, pays for maintenance of roads and so on, that's gone up by an average of £10 this year. Now, the little bit of a stealth grab here on income tax thresholds, they've been frozen for the fourth year in a row. Now, if you think of the rising wages that we've seen over the last few years, especially in the last few months, those thresholds being kept where they were, frozen, it's going to see more people dragged into a higher tax band and more people paying greater tax. So some big changes, some of them good, some of them maybe considered to be not so good. With all changes, there come some problems and there come some solutions. And I'm sure over the next few weeks and months, as all of these changes start to take effect and people notice the impact on their pocket, we're going to hear a lot more about them. And I'm sure many of them will change. I'm going to go back to you now, Graham, to wrap up the rest of the show.
Thanks, Joss. Now, if you'd like to join us as a guest on the Northern Business Podcast, please get in touch. LinkedIn's the best way to do it. We'd love to hear from you. We've got some fascinating guests coming up in the next few weeks during our summer season. And we've had a fascinating guest today. Thanks to Nicky for talking us through that Labour proposal document. Also, thanks to podcast producer Harry Sinclair. Thanks, Harry, and technical operator Robin Campbell. Join us next time for the Northern Business Podcast. Never miss an episode. Like, rate and subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts.